Hello and welcome. This is Video Mojo and my name is Jon Leland. I am a digital marketing strategist and producer with combridges.com, and welcome to Jay Acunzo. So happy to have you here, Jay.
Thanks for having me back. Thank you.
That's right. And it's with good reason. Full disclosure, Jay has not only been a guest on the show before, and his company, if you're interested in checking him out, is marketingshowrunners.com. And Marketing Showrunners has an offering, brand new, just went live in December, of a course called Growable Shows. And that really is where the title of this episode of Video Mojo came from. And I am a participant in the course, and I am, as always, kind of playfully exploring the leading edge of video, and I'm kind of repositioning that. So Jay and I are not only going to talk about the power of video and kind of like how to use podcasting and video shows as a powerful engine for content marketing and authentic relationship building, but we're going to talk about Video Mojo and this show and how we can better serve you, the people that are interested in this journey that I've been on and this exploration. It's been a continual reinvention, I have to say. It started out as a video blog. Then I started getting into live streaming, and we did some pretty sophisticated live streaming productions. I think we were doing that the last time you were here, Jay. And now this is my second episode on Riverside, where I'm really putting an emphasis on the recording as opposed to the live streaming, in order to really be able to do well-produced, high-quality video clips or nuggets out of the program. So does all that make sense, Jay? And did I represent the course well? And anything you want to add there?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the shout out for the course. As I move more of my sort of client services type businesses like public speaking, or, I still do a little bit of the speaking and a little bit of making shows for brands. That's still on the table, but I've moved more digital. So to get the course a shout out on your show is really meaningful. So I appreciate that.
Good. Well, and it makes sense because, I've become more and more an advocate for shows. And I think that part of that is, when I think about what we've been talking about in the course, the passion that I bring to Video Mojo and kind of the mountaintop, you talk about the journey and taking your listeners or viewers on a journey, is the power of video. I just, as a video guy, I was thinking about my history, and I don't usually talk about it with that much detail, but back in the 90s, I produced 2 videos about the coming digital video revolution. At that time, we couldn't edit full broadcast quality video on a laptop computer. And I was a video professional. I wrote for Videography magazine for many years, and I was a big advocate. But we're going to have these digital tools on our desktop and be able to do all the stuff that takes $500,000 of video post-production equipment. And now we can do shows. Now we've all become broadcasters. There's a big common message that all companies are now media companies. And so this opportunity for companies and nonprofits, and I'm a big, I would love to do shows for nonprofits that have a meaningful message. So that's kind of where I'm at, and what's going on. Is that anything you want to add there?
No, I think I agree with all of them. I do worry about the phrase every company is a media company, because every company is not a media company, because a media company makes money on ads. I think we should learn and steal from the best things that media companies do and combine it with the best things we do. So if you sell a product or a service, your business model is far sturdier than selling ads, because you don't have this awkward triumvirate of the audience trying to understand you trying to earn the trust of that audience, but also you trying to flip the audience's attention and relationship towards an advertiser, which so often is just a flyby. It's not a sponsor that's ongoing. So there's not like a depth of relationship that you have with the advertiser or the audience has, but you're trying to broker this hard-won thing, which is the trust and love of your audience, to an advertiser. The advertiser doesn't care about the relationship with your audience. They're just trying to transact them. But media, there's this, purity is the wrong word, but there's this intention behind the editorial. They're not so excited to sell you on something that they dilute the product. Mm-hmm. They know that the job is not to grab attention, it's to hold it, right? The business model they have pushes them towards grabby things like sensational headlines. But the writers, the creators, the editorial leaders at these companies, they truly understand actually it's about creating quality product. In this case, the product is content and holding attention over time. And there's mechanics and techniques and heuristics to do that, and they're world class. So steal from media companies like that, but combine it with this amazing benefit you have, advantage you have of a much sturdier, healthier business model because it's focused on the audience. Now you have two things. You have the editorial, you have the content you're creating, and you have a product or service, both to serve the audience, much more harmonious than that triumvirate of trust, awkward at that, in media.
Yeah, no, and I think, for the sake of that discussion, we could put the advertising aside because I'm not suggesting that every company create media products for advertising. It is, and we're aligned on values, I know, in terms of authentic relationship building, that every company is a publisher, every company is a content creator, and that's one of the terms where I think there's a lot of overlap in these terms. And the terms are continually changing. I could do a whole rant about digital video. And when I was talking about digital video in the 90s, and it's kind of like this term multimedia, there's so many different forms of it. And so every company is a content creator these days.
For
And
sure.
some of them think that doing a blog or having some quote graphics on social media is producing quality content. And my passion about video is that, yes, you can create these kind of human connections. And like you said, hold attention and build long-term relationships. The terms are content marketing. There's even conversational marketing, video marketing. They all kind of meld together. Where do you, I think, talk more about content marketing, and that's what we're talking about. Every company, probably many should be upping their game in order to be more present in the marketplace with shows and better content marketing.
There is an echo of the business model in the great content we see from media, however. So like you would notice, pick anything, theringer.com, a sports and pop culture website that I like. They're now owned by Spotify. Theringer.com makes its money through advertising. So while I do aspire to like steal certain things from them and learn from them, and I'm inspired by them in certain ways from certain shows, I do also have to keep in mind that sometimes they send me the wrong signal because what they're doing when they create a new show is they're like, well, this kind of has to be mainstream. It has to appeal to the most possible people in a casual way, not necessarily a very small subset of people turning them into super fans. So when we sell product and services, it's the reverse. You don't need to the CPM doesn't matter to you. So you don't need a big audience. You need a productive audience. And that audience can be 200 people. And your show is a smash hit. Like a good example is last year with the pandemic, public speaking being an industry that was essentially on pause for a while. I found myself scrambling and I created a couple of online workshops that I ran for 8 weeks at a time with students. Well, what I noticed when I asked people how they found the workshop and what projects of mine they engaged with prior to buying a seat in the workshop, 100% of the workshop students had listened to my podcast 3 clips, which is kind of like Song Exploder meets Inside the Actor's Studio. Other podcasters deconstruct their work for us. So on 3 clips, my ego is telling me I wish it was much bigger. I wish it was thousands and thousands of downloads per episode. It's not. It's far smaller. But it's a runaway hit for me because almost all the revenue that I drove last year were from listeners of that show. And so that's all you need. You need the productive audience. Shows are great for straightening the funnel, but there's this perception that actually it's about growing the top of your funnel because, back to media, we do take our cues from the celebrity interviewing other celebrities without much of a premise or structure. The media companies chasing these big brand, like every business show in media is the same. Just talking about flavors of the week, talking about the biggest possible companies you can find, right? Because they sell ads. You can be really niche, really weird, really, really, really specific. And actually that's a much better show for you. Because again, you don't need a big audience, you need a productive audience.
Yeah, I'm kind of amazed, and I know you are aware of the kind of seminal Kevin Kelly article, and we'll put the link in the notes, A
Sure.
Thousand True Fans. I just see it referenced all the time, and it's exactly what you're talking about. One of the things that I've gotten out of the course, and which I'm working on, and it's kind of, I feel a little embarrassed, and because it's so simple, is getting clearer about who my ideal audience is and who I
Mm-hmm.
really want to be talking to. Because I'm not trying to help every mom and pop solopreneur, God bless them, I love them, the whole creator market even. I'm a B2B guy who wants to talk to visionary organizations, be they nonprofit or corporations, but who really have a mission, a vision, and whose voice can use the amplification of a show and then all the great content that comes out of a show. And
I
so,
mean, that phrase alone, like as someone who, I'm thinking about the meta level here. You're interviewing me about stuff, but I'm also thinking about how your show's unfolding because I make shows too, right?
right. Well, and I'll
Visionary.
interrupt you just to say we've agreed
Yeah,
that
yeah.
we're going to be talking about the show as well as talking about the
Right.
opportunities and video, et cetera, et cetera. Sorry to
When I hear
interrupt.
you say visionary, no worries. That's a good point for your audience to know. But when I hear you say visionary organizations, video for visionary organizations, what does that mean? And actually like owning that, like staking a claim to it, as my friend Drew Davis would say, you stake your claim. This is what the territory I'm going to explore and the angle into that territory. So you kind of have your topics, which is video and being on the leading edge of video and video marketing. That's your topics. That's like the terrain you aim to explore. But now you need an angle or a hook through that. And there's different ways you can do that. And I know you're going through this in the course, John, but one way to do that is to declare that you're on a quest to explore something more deeply. How are organizations who are visionary using video? Because certainly it's not just taking a podcast, creating 5 teasery videos for social media, and that's how they're using video. So you have to define what are visionary organizations, how do they operate, and then when you press video through that lens, what comes out the other side? And so there's examples you can find, there's questions, there's heuristics and frameworks, and it all comes back to, well, that's the audience I want to serve. So the premise itself, the wrapper around your show, the idea driving it, needs to declare it pretty overtly because people need to self-select into it and then also refer others like them to you. So back to the Kevin Kelly 1,000 True Fans, if you get 100 people even who are excited about the show, you almost want that premise that people get so quickly and so deeply that even before they watch or listen, they're like, hey, I just discovered this show. Check it out. I haven't listened yet. I haven't watched yet, but this seems like it's for you and me, Barry. And you knew me, but not Barry, right? So that's how the word of mouth sparks.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like just to wrap this rant up, I think that you have the stuff in front of you and actually it's about the fallacy of sunk costs come into play because you're like, well, I've been doing Video Mojo a while. It's called Video Mojo. We talk about the leading edge of video and I've been doing it over and over again. And I wonder, and this is a possibility because I'm less informed than you are, I wonder, is this show really better suited for you, your business, your audience, if it was visionary video or insert idea here, if it truly owned visionary organizations plus video, what would happen there?
Well, and I think that's where we're headed. I mean, it's because I see that mountaintop. Let me take a half a step back because I think you did a rant that relates to your course, and I do recommend your course for people that are, exploring this terrain, and in particular in the planning phase. So there's a balance between being on the journey and letting what the show is unfold and continuing to discover, and taking this step back, because the show is based on organizing your premise. That, and you, so my question for you, even though I have a sense of the answer, I think it's worth you articulating. Why is a premise so important, and why should people spend a good amount of time really working on the premise of a podcast or video show?
Sure. So, I mean, a premise is why people subscribe. It provides motivation to subscribe. It's also a big reason why people share it. So it's really what does the growing of the show. It's what gets people to self-select and opt in. There's some growth. It's what gets people to share it, at least in part. There's more growth. So that's why the course is called Growable Shows, because we all want our shows to grow, but very rarely have we built anything growable. The way I'd break down a show in simple terms so we can all attack it more easily or access it more easily is to just divide up the process of making a show into the strategic addressing of 4 challenges. So your first challenge is to say something that matters. The idea driving your show. That's the premise. Say something that matters. Is your show about anything that people actually want to know, to go deeper on, to invest time in? Difficult.
Can we pause there? Because I love that point. And you used the term which I'm now adopting, and I hope I'll try and give you credit every time I use it,
Sure.
of commodity content. You
Yeah.
know that I think we are all sick of it. I mean, it's commodity content. People think being on social media, if you hire a virtual assistant to put a bunch of quotes up there, you're doing social media. And that's just commodity content, and it doesn't work there, and it definitely doesn't work in shows. So I love
Right.
that you make the first point that you have to say something that matters and have a
Yep.
real message. And that's kind of why I'm saying my ideal clients are visionary organizations, nonprofits or
And I love
profit,
that.
who definitely have something to say. Then we can work together. So,
And I love that so much. And you can, as you further define that and flesh it out, you can bring in the right guests and have the right pithy statements that you say on repeat to really cement your message. And, the branding of the show, all of that aligns. So the premise is really like this decision making filter because it informs how you approach each episode, right? Like ostensibly a great premise allows you to talk to that big name guest that all your competitors talk to. But then you can say, hey, you've heard Seth Godin interviewed on these 12 shows before, but you've never heard him interviewed like we talked to him on our show because we have a premise.
mhm.
And most people are like trying to get him on their show in business because he's Seth Godin, or maybe he's Seth Godin and has a book. But that's the same reason everyone else is having him on the show. You're having him on the show because you're trying to explore this specific thing over here, and you think that as a subject, he's pretty interesting because he's got this view on that, right? So it's actually like the guests serve the premise, your choices serve the premise, your marketing relates to the premise. So it's really important to nail your premise. And because it's this like idea stage type thing, you haven't produced like an episode yet, I think people skip it because they think like, it's theoretical, it's not important. Like, no, this is the IP that you are creating, which
Intellectual
has
property for
compounding
those who
value.
may
Yeah.
be new.
Create some IP. Don't create yet another podcast talking to experts about their expertise. Like the world doesn't need yet another, but the world might need something that only you can create. And that's a process. You can build those ideas. You don't have to go and find them.
Okay, so I interrupted you. You said there were four things. The first one was saying something that matters.
Yeah, so that's why the premise is so important. So let's pair this. Let's do it this way. Let's talk about there's the challenge, the benefit to the audience, and then the piece of the show you should work on to address the challenge and get that benefit, right? So, challenge one, say something that matters. The benefit to the audience is they feel motivation to subscribe. The piece of the show you work on to do that is your premise. Once people opt in, once you've said something that matters to people, now they need to stay. You need to encourage them to stick around. So, the second challenge is get them to the end. Provide motivation to stay. How do you do that? Come up with a format for your episode. So under the hood of every great show, every great story is some kind of structure. Sometimes it's implicitly sensed, or what I'd call invisible, the invisible rundown of the episode. Sometimes it's a visible rundown. So like a visible rundown like is a standard news program where you see the blocks visible on the screen, or they say like first top stories, then they go to like second good news. Those are visible rundowns. They structure that they know, you know too, as the audience.
And I
But
and I
most
and I
things
had
are
one, and I
invisible.
kind of let it go for now.
Yeah, last time I was here, we went through a visible rundown. That's
Right.
right.
That's right.
That's right. And then the opposite is invisible, and that's where people trip up because they're like, oh well, I do an interview show. It's a 45-minute episode, and my visible rundown is I do an intro, music, 35-minute interview, outro. I'm like, no. You have to structure the 35-minute interview part where it's like, okay, block one, A block is the big radical thing they did that everyone will see as different instead of the backstory for 16 minutes, right? Like everyone structures the same interviews the same ways. If you actually have a plan underneath your interviews or underneath your stories, the hero's journey is one structure of a story that exists, and it's not just marketing, it's not shows, it's just any story. You can use the hero's journey as a template. You start to have this ability now to create consistently, to improve because you can spot problems more easily, and you can also reinvent because you're like, B block is kind of our weakest. Let's experiment with this new thing. So there's all these benefits, and you get people to the end better if you actually have a plan underneath your episode, every episode. And most people don't. And that's a really dangerous thing to do because very rare is the type of person who can wing it and have it feel very coherent in its flow. So that's challenge 2. Do you want me to do the next 2 really quick?
Sure.
Okay. Really quick. Say something that matters, get them to the end. Deepen the relationship. Okay, now you have the structure to build trust. The premise is great, the format is great. They feel motivation to subscribe, motivation to stay. Now it's about letting your quirks, your personality, your talent shine. You need to perform. And so this provides that motivation to act. People feel like they have a relationship with you. They feel like they're actually like getting a little bit more about who Jon is. And this is it's irreplaceable now because yeah, someone could take over, or yeah, someone else might take a crack at Jon's domain here with their own show. But I want to go and listen to Jon or watch Jon because that's my favorite show. So now it gets personal. And this happens all over a show. It's the little micro things and quirks, which are hard to just kind of list out. But if you have a plan, you're like clear on the premise and the format, now you can stop thinking about those things because it's internalized, and you can just be your best self on the microphone in service of those 2 things. But it's when you're constantly having to think about, do I follow up here or do I move on? What next topic do we cover? You're like, no, it's right here. B block is about this next topic. Now you can just exist. Now you can be mindful of what Jon is saying and really let your own personality shine. So that's the 3rd challenge, deepen the relationship. And the 4th is to reinvent the experience, because stagnation is the enemy, and doing the same things the same way over and over and over again, you lose even your biggest fans. So you need to provide that refreshing feeling in little ways. You don't have to pull big stunts, but in little ways to change things and adapt things and to let people know, hey, we're evolving, to come with us. This is a constant evolution. And that's exciting for a lot of people to say, oh, I'm on the journey with Jon. I'm not just listening to somebody give me all their pre-baked answers and that's it forever, every episode. Because eventually there's another option, or they just get bored of the same old, same old. So reinvent the experience is the final challenge. And then you're back to saying something that matters, and the cycle continues.
Yeah, no, I really like that. I appreciate you running it down. I think that my strength is in the reinvention. And, you really did me a service the last time you were on Video Mojo by making that distinction between being an explorer rather than being an expert. And, that I think my follow-up question to your structure there is around this reinvention, where I think you can go too far with it. And if anybody's guilty of that, it's probably me, because I'm always reinventing. And, when I've called it, as I have been for quite some time, a playful exploration, I meant that for real, because I am having fun. This is fun for me. And I'm definitely exploring and endlessly fascinated by the opportunities, the tools, and so forth that will enable visionary organizations to make a difference, to say something that matters, and to have their voices be amplified through not just a show, but through all the other content pieces that can spin out of a show. So where's the balance between playfully exploring and continuing to reinvent all the time, and trying to nail down a format and be consistent and provide that kind of value?
I would say the goal is to play with purpose, to reinvent intentionally. Because I get the same way. I'm like, my favorite stage of a project is when all the parts and pieces are on the ground, nothing is built yet, and all you have is the story of what could be. You have this, like, in your mind's eye, you're like, this would be cool, and this problem is worth solving, and this project's worth trying, and it's a mess, right? So what that forces me to do when a project has been going for a while is feel the temptation to rip it all apart, put all the pieces again on the ground. But that ignores the fact that some things are going well and people like them, and also I'm learning and improving too. So when you have a premise, that's like the outer bounds of the map. So you're at least like, okay, at least I know the map we're exploring, and so I know there's another territory off to the right, but that's not what the show is for. And that plagues most shows. Like, it's almost like there's these filters. They have this in evolutionary science where they talk about the evolution of species, and there's these kill filters. It's like certain species don't get past consciousness, right? So we are the lone species we know that got through that filter. I don't think it's called kill filters, but that's in my head what it's called.
Okay.
But this is a real heuristic in science. Like, most species die off or fail to get through that filter. We got through, and now we're conscious. And there's like different levels of consciousness and intelligence that other species may or may not in the universe be through, and we haven't passed yet. So with show running, most shows fail to get through the first filter, which is to just have that specific, pithy, and powerful premise. Because they're like, oh, it's a map that I'm going to explore this, but also this and also that. And so that's one form of reinvention that you can get rid of if you just know your premise. But then also if you have the format too, now you can step back and look at the structure and say, okay, and we do this all the time on 3 clips. We're like, you know, we're not really introducing the guest quick enough. It's too much Jay early in the episode. So now A block we have to tweak, because where it once was me rattling off a bunch of facts about the podcaster that we're profiling that day, now we call it the warm moment, where you're going to meet the person, you're going to hear a story from them, you're going to hear me and them laugh, and you're going to feel a kinship with the podcaster before you learn a little bit more about their bio and backstory, right? So it's a better version of the show. So it's reinventing with purpose. And the hard part is, if you're just relying on gut feel, my gut is all over the place, right? It's like I have idea indigestion all the time. It's just churning constantly.
I'm familiar with that feeling.
Right? And so that causes me to like scrap and change, and, you know, and I think having that ability to say, whew, I have a plan for these episodes. And when I feel, because I do this all the time, I feel something isn't sitting right. Now I can step back and observe it more objectively, and then use my subjective taste to say, here's where I'll play. Right? And it's like this little earmarked thing I'm trying. And I can even message that to the audience. Like, hey, we're going to do a monthly mini series about X topic. And I'm going to earmark it as this is where we're playing, and there's no proof it's going to work. But I'm telling you that. And then everything else will be the same. So you can do it outside of your core episodes or inside of your core episodes. So the punchline here is you need the premise and you need the format in order to play with purpose. Otherwise, it tips too far into chaos or just constantly churning. And, you know, once a listener is like, I like this show, you've revamped too much of it. It looks like something entirely different. And so you fail to serve the listener. You fail to learn anything yourself because you're changing the topics or the premise too much, and it can fall off the rails.
Yeah, and then there's, so I appreciate that, and I think, you know, you have to have a certain amount of discipline in almost anything in order to make progress, and that doesn't mean that you don't change course. So, yeah, reinventing with purpose makes a lot of sense to me. So we had a Twitter exchange this morning with Lindsay Chepkema, and it was about the power of repurposing elements of a show. And so I feel immediately aligned with her, even though I've never even met her. We just had this Twitter exchange this morning, because she's passionate about, and wrote an article in Marketing Profs that we'll also put in the show notes, about using shows or podcasts in particular, I think she's talking about, as a content engine. And I'm a fully believer in that, and it's something that I've been ramping up towards. And you know, I wanted to get your view about the balance, a different kind of balance, a balance between working on a show and producing a show the way you've just articulated so beautifully, and having a social media presence where short clips can be repurposed. Because to me, I'll argue for the other side. For me, in a way, the show is probably less impact than a whole ongoing series of social media posts that provide pithy nuggets that are highlights out of the show, and I think conceivably can reach more people and make an impact. And, you know, it will also probably build audience for the show. So it definitely is not either or. But do you agree about that as a kind of a reason to do a show, because it helps you have a better social media presence and make more connection and deliver more valuable content, as opposed to just the emphasis being on shows?
I don't know where along the way people in marketing started to think about themselves and their role in work like this, but we tend to remove ourselves and our specifics and try to understand like a tactic, a channel, or a technology in the abstract. And it's sort of like, you know, like the other day somebody asked, should I worry about Clubhouse as a podcaster, or should I use Clubhouse? And I was kind of like, I felt a little bit jaded by the question and by all of marketing, quite frankly. And I just said, like, carpenters don't ask other carpenters, should I use a hammer? Do hammers work? Because it's just a tool. It's just a tool. And it's how you use it and what you're trying to build that matter infinitely more. So, like, here's a tool. you have a lot of content in a show. There's an asset. What could you do with it? You could put it on social media. What do you put on social media? I can't tell you. I can't tell you what works, in air quotes, in general. I can only tell you what's worked for me because I have those details and those variables. Or maybe I can give you some questions to think through. But I can't say with certainty, to your point on like repurposing content, that you should or should not do that. My favorite show in the world is Radiolab. They do almost none. Another show, I could probably name several marketing shows that all I see from the host on Twitter are repurposed quotes and images and things like that. And I guarantee you that they feel like their show is struggling. And so I think we get
you
too,
certainly go too far with that stuff. I agree.
we get too enamored.
I won't name him, but there's somebody who's doing that with those video clips, and it is becoming a little bit too much.
We get too enamored with like the thing itself has this inherent quality to it. No, it doesn't. It's just a container, and it's what you put inside, right? Like I can only say so much in the abstract. Like this is what Tupperware is good for, and then really it's about like how do you want to use it? What's inside? That's kind of like really the determining factor. And so I've tried to take myself out of the general conversation because I find myself giving too many generalities, and I just don't believe in that. So I think the best way to address this idea is to think of yourself as somebody who sells wine. So I'm Italian, so of course it comes back to food and wine with every analogy and metaphor. When you sell wine, there's two ways to sell wine. There's actively sell it, proactively outbound, I guess. One is you go and tell people that you have some wine over here, so come buy it. And that's the equivalent of like posting a link back to your show. Or you can hand out samples of the wine and be like, let me prove it to you. It's delicious. And that's like posting a quote, a segment, writing a blog post based on your article or based on your episode. It's giving away value with the expectation that you can prove it. And what I see happen with a lot of marketers repurposing content is they get caught in the middle. They're kind of like, I'm doing the thing that looks like it's a sampling of the product, like I'm giving away a little graphic or a video of the podcast. But when you listen to it, in and of itself, it doesn't stand alone. In other words, it's not like you can really taste much. You can't sense the deliciousness because they have the link and the click-through mentality, but they're trying it inside of a container that is meant to carry value, and it doesn't. So I think like the way I like to approach it is, what were the best moments inside the show? Give them away wherever your community is, wherever you're building community. So not in every channel, but right now for me, Twitter is important. So, okay, I'll give some value away there. My newsletter is important. A lot of my newsletters addresses at the top, notes and stories from me come from the podcast that I do. So I think that's a much better way to think about marketing. Think of it as participation in the community, not promotion to the community, right? Don't tell people, run around and tell people, I got a show. We have a show. It's a great show. Here's the show. Give away the wine. But you have to be okay with people opting not to come to the full thing. And that's all right because they already got value from you. So your perception has gone up in their minds. Your relationship has started to deepen a little bit, and leave it to them to decide, hey, actually, that was so delicious. I want some more.
Yeah, we're back to no commodity content and having it really be. I mean, Lindsay had another phrase that I saw on her website, which is connection before conversions. And I think that it speaks to the same bottom line element. Well, so marketingshowrunners.com, and the course is called Growable Shows, Jay's podcast. The current active one is 3 clips. But I want to take you up on your invitation to dissect Video Mojo.
Sure.
And, so where do we start with that?
Well, good news is we already got out what I call the Showrunner Circle, right? The 4 challenges you face, the motivation it provides to the audience at different stages, and the piece of the show that corresponds with each of the 4 challenges. So we already have some understanding as an audience here of what we're dealing with. And I thought we would just talk about your show in terms of those 4 things. We talked about the premise a little bit already, and I think you're on the road towards that based on what we discussed already, based on the course. So one of the things I noticed is when we started, I wrote down, you made an introduction about the channels we were on, like there's Facebook and there's other things. And then you talked a little bit more about some of the facts that you were going through. Like you are taking my course, which I so appreciated you saying. And, Video Mojo, as you know, has gone through these different iterations, et cetera. So it's kind of like you were giving away some answers, some facts. But I think the most important thing to start with is questions, is intrigue, or what they would call an open loop. So open loops are these hidden techniques all over storytelling, and some last decades, like Game of Thrones. The name is an open loop. Who will sit on the throne? That loop stayed open until the very end of the show. Some loops are really, really tiny. Like, I'm going to tell you this one thing, but now I'm going to tell you this other thing. By me saying but, I've opened a loop, and you're like, oh, what's next? And how does it contradict what came before the word but? And so these ideas of open loops, which is where you raise questions and then answer them later, or start a sequence of events and conclude the story later, open loops are why people stick around. And I think we have to be laser focused on that idea. So this is the second challenge, get them to the end. And I think when you open, you have an opportunity to make it feel like an event. Not in an overly sensational way, but to, amp the energy and also hammer home the fact that something great is coming. Not that you're excited to be here, not that we have a great guest, because what other options are there? I'm sad to be here. We have a terrible guest. That's filler. But you could talk about, thematically. So everybody is thinking about X, and we're all struggling to do Y. Well, today we're going to talk to somebody who says, don't even try Y. Oh, right. So there's a question on the mind of your audience. It's like, why is this person saying to not do the thing we're all trying to do? Right. So that's just one example of giving some details that immediately say to the audience, this will be worth your time. Stick around. And instead of trying to summarize what's happening in the episode, which kind of gives away too many of the answers, you should instead raise intrigue by planting questions in the audience's mind.
Great.
So that's one
wonderful input.
Specific thing. One specific thing. And it has to do with the format, the second challenge of get them to the end. The other thing I would talk about is to get the guest talking as soon as possible in a way that also cements that idea to the audience that this is a guest worth sticking around with. So I think I also wrote down the timestamp. I think it was something like 2 minutes and 30 seconds until I spoke, and then another 2 minutes afterwards until you heard me give an answer to something. So there's about a 5-minute buffer before the guest has a chance to earn the trust of the audience. And I think you want to give the guests that chance quicker so that the audience is sort of affirmed in their decision to watch or listen. So that's another thing I see a lot of shows do, which is they try to use a pull quote early from the guest. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is have the guest give away some value to the audience as soon as humanly possible, like trying the wine in that analogy. So instead of who are you, what do, you take care of that stuff and then really quickly ask some sort of penetrating, important question so that the guest is forced to impart wisdom, ideas, a story to the audience.
And was there more on your list of Video Mojo dissection suggestions? These are so great.
I think, I could pick nits all day, but I think the more important thing here is going to be the premise, because so much of this is going to be predicated on understanding and having a clear articulation of your premise, because the very same guest and or story featured on your show with your premise is going to look very different than those same things on another show. So to talk any further about the structure, the format, I don't think it's quite time yet, because it should flow more from your premise.
Right.
An example of what I mean there: when I ran my first podcast, Unthinkable, which it's coming back this year, it's a story style podcast. The hope for the first run of that show was to showcase how, from the outside looking in, innovative and creative work seems unthinkable. Like they broke from the best practices because they were gifted some magical insight or they had some talent at birth. And it seems crazy what they did. But then you'd talk to these people and it would always seem logical. They'd always be like, yeah, why would I do it any differently? Because if you consider X, Y, and Z in my situation, those details make me think the way I did it was safe and not the best practice. And so I just kept having those conversations, and I realized a better way to structure the interviews and the stories on Unthinkable was actually to start by building up the best practice to make it seem inescapable and smart and get everybody nodding, then showcase what they did that seemed unthinkable. So now you see the comparison. It's like, wow, that does seem radically different. What an innovator, what a visionary. And then have them follow that up quickly with, and here's why it was actually super smart and logical and safe. And now you're starting to question, well, wait, maybe the best practice isn't truly the best. Maybe it's just a generality. And And we're better off using our own situations to inform our choices, right? Okay, well, now let's hear the backstory of this guest and how they arrived at that decision. Normally, the backstory section would go first, but because I knew my premise, I made a choice that seems a little bit weird, which is to put it fourth instead of first. So I think that's where you're at now, Jon, is once you can get clarity around the premise, you can start to understand, how do I make the case every episode for that thesis, for that idea, and structure it in such a way that brings it out best. And it's hard to do that first. You kind of have to let the premise lead and do the formatting second.
Makes sense. Yeah, no, it's really, I guess I know about myself is that I tend to be somebody who wings it. And so it's a great discipline for me to step back and to actually work on the premise and, like I said, get clear about who my audience is and the fact that I'm a B2B. And you've also had a little light bulb go off that there are great visionary organizations, both profit and nonprofit out there that I can use as examples and bring on and dissect what they're doing in a video sense. And I'm endlessly fascinated by the workflows and different ways that we can use video to build deeper connections. So Jay, you're an inspiration. The course has been really valuable, and I'm 2/3 of the way through. I still have a third to go, but I've already gotten enormous value, and it's a gift to me that you take the time to be here with me and to do this interview. So thank you again for doing this.
That's super nice of you. I really appreciate that. If anybody's watching or listening to this and is interested in the course, just shoot me a DM on Twitter, and I'll happily give you like a few dollars off the purchase price, because I really appreciate you giving so much airtime to that thing. So you could DM me. I'm just Jay Acunzo on Twitter, and
a special deal, special deal for Video Mojo
special deal
listeners
just for you
only.
Guys.
Well, thanks again, and I
Sure.
know we'll see you online, and we'll be in touch. Thank you again, everybody who watched and listened. Your participation, and if you made it all the way to the end of this, you're definitely part of our tribe, and I'm very, very grateful for you. So we'll see you on the next episode of Video Mojo.